Hey everyone, welcome back to the realm. I'll be your guide beyond Waking Realm. Today we're diving into the meaning behind Alan Wake, a story told in acts. A man who writes to remain. There are characters who survive by fighting, characters who survive by escaping, and then there are characters who survive by telling themselves a story. Alan Wake is one of those characters. This is not a story about defeating darkness. It's not even a story about leaving it, per se. It's the story of a man who uses narrative to hold himself together, only to discover that when authorship becomes a survival mechanism, identity itself begins to erode. Alan Wake does not think in chapters, he thinks in acts. Acts are how he organizes chaos, how he frames meaning, how he convinces himself that something, someone, is still in control. And over time, those acts stop being a structure and start becoming a prison. This is not a timeline. This is a psychological descent. If you're ever used stories, your own or someone else's, to survive something that didn't make sense, then this story already knows you, because Alan Wake isn't trapped in the dark place. He's trapped in the need to explain himself. Act 1. The writer who thought he was in control. Alan Wake's story does not truly begin at the start of the game. It begins at the end. Alan Wake is trapped in the dark place, physically gone, psychologically suspended, narratively unresolved. He just saved his wife. He swapped places with her at the end. He got rid of, the dark place, and he got into it. And in that moment, he comes to a realization that defines his entire arc. He cannot escape through action. He can only survive through authorship. Alan believes that if he can write the story correctly, the world will obey him. This is the first lie, because Alan doesn't write to understand what's happening to him. He writes to overwrite it. Writing becomes control. Control becomes ego. Ego becomes denial. The more he started to write these rules up, that this is a horror story, all these different drafts how to escape, it really started to reference was he truly in control at that moment, at that time, at that place? Was everything going the way he wanted to? How many drafts would it take until he himself can write himself out of the story and then back to the real world? The dark place isn't just a supernatural threat. It's a mirror. It externalizes what Alan refuses to face internally. Guilt, fear, repression. Alan frames himself as a responsible, as necessary, as the only one who can fix this. But responsibility becomes a shield against introspection. He figured that at the end, he said, and don't quote me on the words because I kind of forgot it, but basically it was like, this is not a lake, it's an ocean. And that's where we left off. And until he started writing up different types of scenarios, and where apparently his mind started to fracture a little bit when in the 2 DLCs that was given to us in Alan Wake, he meets up with Tom Zane. Tom Zane mentions to him that we've been through this, that pretty much you're writing yourself in circles. And then he gets out of it. And so when he gets out of it, he then believes authorship makes him powerful. Because he somehow, with practice and getting stuck, he finds himself with some clarity, and he was like, okay, I'm powerful, I'm getting somewhere. But what it really does is delay his reckoning. Authorship as denial. Alan's writing is not therapeutic. It's defensive. He narrates events as if narration itself grants authority, as if naming pain neutralizes it. This is why the dark place responds to him. Not because he's special, but because he refuses to stop shaping reality around his own fear. Like, everything he touches, everything he writes, and this was beyond Alan Wake 2. Before all of this, like, how did he know that this was a horror story? At this point in time, how many stories has he written? How many drafts of genres has he gotten himself into? And why is it dark place, or the darkness resonates more with his writing, his themes, his works, his idea, and his mentality? Didn't he have anything bright and shiny and light and happy to write about? Because I would. If it was up to me, I would try to write something happily to get to my wife. Or get out of the dark place, at the least. The first fracture. Even in Alan Wake 1, you can see the fracture forming. There's a man experiencing terror, and the writer observing it. Alan is already splitting into function. One part survives, one part documents. He doesn't notice yet, but the story does. Like, and the fact that the more he struggled, the more demented his mind got, the more it worn him down. There's no telling how time revolves around the dark place, how time moved about between Alan Wake 1 at the end through the DLCs in Alan Wake 1, the latter portion of Alan Wake, I believe, is called Night Springs. And then finally, when the system finds you. Control, AWE. Control changes everything, not by expanding Alan Wake's story, but by reframing it. Because in Control, Alan's suffering is no longer personal, it's systematic. The Federal Bureau of Control doesn't rescue Alan, they classify him, they observe him, contain him, file him away as an altered world event, and everything that's documented into the AWE scenario. Alan moves from I am trapped in my own mind to I am an object of study. Not that he knows this, but it's what the outside world wants to appear to him for, at least in the FBC. This is institutional horror. Not the fear of being hunted, but the fear of being understood too clinically. Alan is no longer unique. He is repeatable. And it's something that we oversee and start observing it, the results in Alan Wake 2, and more especially in the Lake House DLC, and how that, yes, in this moment I'm skipping forward a little bit, but I'm just mentioning the fact that the FBC is trying to replicate what Alan does and understand him, because one, they probably think he is gone, but at the same time, all of his writings come back out, and what if they too can harness that power? So he is repeatable, no longer unique to them. Alan and Tom Zane. And then Alan speaks with Tom. Tom Zane is not a guide. He is not a mentor. He is a narrative echo. When in the first game, it did seem like he was guide and he was a mentor, but you only speak to him a few times, which was, now it's been a while since I played the game of the first one, right? But I remember that you met up with him in the beginning of the game, and then I think more especially at the end, but for certain it was in the DLC. And it seemed like he was trying to help you. And then soon after I beat that game, a couple of months later, I started playing Control, right? Just so I can prepare myself to when Alan Wake 2 got released. And in Control, Tom Zane looks just like Alan, and all of a sudden he's just over here being aloof and like, you know, let's work together, let's get out of here. And I'm just like, and he starts seeming very cynical, very sinister, and they talked about the evil doppelganger, right? And I'm just like, what is this alluding to? And that's why he's a narrative echo. A residue of someone who tried to survive the same way Alan is surviving now. Tom speaks in metaphor, in ritual, in abstraction. Alan speaks in exhaustion. While we perceive it and watch from observation from outside, it is madness. But in this moment, this is not madness. This is chronic trauma. Alan's psyche is beginning to partition by function. One part clings to coherence, one part dissolves into symbolism. Tom represents the endpoint, what happens when a man becomes nothing but story, when identity collapses into narrative residue. Alan isn't talking to a friend, he's talking to a possible future self. And here is some foreshadowing. This is the warning Alan doesn't fully hear. If he loses himself to the story, he won't disappear. He'll remain as something else. The writer who became the story, Act 2. By the time Alan Wake 2 begins, authorship no longer saves Alan. It barely sustains him. Alan is no longer writing to escape the dark place. He's writing to remain himself. And you ask, or you think about it, why do I say that? Is that really true? Well, let's think about it. At this point in time, yes, probably 13 years has passed in the mortal realm, but at the same time, how long, what year, what time, what day is it for Alan in the dark place? How many stories has he written at this point? How many drafts? How many things has he told himself that he could get out of? And yet the same, in this case, loop keeps on happening until he realizes it's a spiral. And that how many times he met with Tom Zane, how many times he talked through others through his scripts, reaching out to others in the mortal realm, and how many times he's gone through to see Mr. Door. At this point, he's given up. Tom has told him time and time again, he's given up, he stopped writing, and Tom had to do something, and so he did, and with the help of Mr. Scratch. So by the time Alan does wake up and realize what he needs to do, we're caught up to the current events of the game. And this is the shift. The story is no longer a tool, it's an environment. Loops repeat, scenes fracture, identity blurs. Alan is both the writer and the text being rewritten, which is why he's very similar and knows who Alex Casey is, and because he is Alex Casey in some weird way, because besides being immersed into the story and into his character, he is playing a role as a detective. And this is what trauma does. It doesn't move forward, it circles. Each loop costs coherence. Each revision erases something human. Loops as trauma memory. The loops aren't puzzles, they're memory traps. Trauma replays until it exhausts meaning. Alan isn't failing to escape, he's failing to stop narrating himself into fragments. It's like he puts himself into these fragments, these memory traps. He gets himself into these moments and he can't get himself out. I mean, after all, Mr. Door did say in his frustration and whatnot that this has to end. This is the last time he's going to help him. And he will do well to do his part, because he's reached out, playing around with other people's lives, got someone personal to Mr. Door in trouble, and everyone's helping him. So he better get his act straight, get it going, and in due time return the favor. So there's no telling how many times this has gone through when he himself said, you can get yourself out. It's like he's alluding that you're choosing not to. Institutional horror returns. Control's present lingers here, because now we understand the stakes. If Alan fails, he won't die. He won't vanish. He'll be cataloged. Filed. Preserved without agency. Existential horror replaces supernatural horror. Learning to exist inside the story. Alan Wake doesn't escape the dark place. That's the truth. He learns how to exist inside it. Survival stops meaning freedom. It starts meaning coherence, continuity, recognition. Alan Wake is not about winning. It's about what remains when control collapses, when authorship fails, when the story doesn't end, but you still have to live inside it. Alan survives not because he finishes the story, but because he accepts that the story may never let him go. And by doing so, he relinquishes himself spiritually as he comes to the resolutions that the help he received, his wife, Saga, Mr. Door, and so many more, that truly he is cared for and that he himself lets go. And by doing so, he's able to go through the spiral. And maybe that's the most honest horror of all. Not darkness, but persistence.